Welcome to the SecureWorld Sessions. We are a cybersecurity podcast that is all about access. Access to people and ideas that can impact your personal cybersecurity career and help you secure your organization. Hello there, my name is Bruce Sussman, and I'm Director of Content at SecureWorld and also your podcast host. And I've got some really exciting news. Our podcast is now in its second decade. Of course, that's only because we're recording this during the first week of 2020, but technically that's a new decade, right? So officially, we broadcast in 2 decades and we're aiming for 3. But we have something like 365,000 days to go to make that happen. And it's probably a little less than that, but I didn't want to do the math. Anyway, will podcasting even be a thing at that point? Stay tuned, cybersecurity fans, stay tuned. But all we know is it is a thing right now. And in today's session, we're opening the file on Zero Trust. And on the way, we're talking about simulating a mass malware outbreak at your organization.
And it was a very, very interesting exercise to see how the malware could spread through the environment, what controls were effective, what controls weren't effective. It's also a great way to evaluate staff responses, because we didn't really tell most of the staff that this was happening.
That is Chris Frenz, AVP of Information Security at Interfaith Medical Center in New York, with a really interesting story on the simulation he ran at his hospital. He is going to help us understand, what does the cyber threat landscape for hospitals look like right now? And then we'll dive into what he and his team have done around Zero Trust, which can help slam the door and limit damage from all kinds of things, like a hacker who's breached your system. It can even protect you from a rogue X-ray machine. And that's another interesting part of today's episode. So right now, let's go to SecureWorld New York, our cybersecurity conference there, one of 17 regional SecureWorld conferences. And you'll hear some collaboration in the background. If you're a regular listener or you go to our regional conferences, you already know background noise is a good thing because ideas are being shared. We love that. Now to New York and my interview with Chris Frenz, AVP of Information Security at Interfaith Medical Center. Chris, so first of all, give me an idea of what the threat landscape looks like right now in the healthcare industry as you see it, through the lens of your organization.
Healthcare actually has a pretty big threat landscape right now. In 2017, Health and Human Services did a cybersecurity task force report which looked at hospitals all across the country, and they found several major issues that plague most hospitals. One is a lack of security talent. Few hospitals actually have a full-time security person on staff. There's a huge number of legacy devices within hospitals, which presents problems because many of those devices have a bunch of vulnerabilities. And on top of that, there's often what they call premature overconnectivity. As you have more and more regulations requiring electronic health records and other systems come online, a lot of devices that were never meant to be on a network are now suddenly being put in a network, and few hospitals are prepared to deal with the security risks that poses.
And I know that in your session description you had mentioned something about, WannaCry, for example, which was, we know, huge in healthcare, especially overseas. But that really creates a different meaning of denial of service, right? I mean, this is serious.
Yes, WannaCry was actually very serious. Not only did it take out a lot of hospitals throughout the U.S. as well as in the U.K., particularly the National Health Service of the U.K., one of the interesting things is WannaCry illustrated that it was not just patient data that was at risk, but potentially patients themselves. A lot of people don't realize, but a lot of the medical devices that are run in hospitals run a Windows operating system also. So as that ransomware spread through and encrypted various computers throughout hospitals, in many cases also encrypted some of the medical devices that were being used to treat patients. And that can be very, very problematic, particularly depending on the device that's made unavailable. For example, if you take something like a stroke patient, when the stroke patient comes into the emergency room, they'll do a CT scan right away to assess the patient. And there's a certain window of which they have to provide treatment, or the damage becomes irreversible. Now, if that device were to become encrypted, it delays the care, the window might be exceeded, and there's going to be an adverse outcome for the patient. So a lot of ransomware does provide potential effect to negatively impact the patient.
Yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me of a conversation that I had with Jason Whitty, who is the CISO of JP Morgan Chase, and he was talking about, in his view now, cybersecurity is really about, life security, and that's nowhere is that more true probably than in healthcare. So that's really interesting.
Definitely healthcare, as well as a lot of the industrial control systems used for electric grids and other stuff. There's a lot of critical infrastructure that cybersecurity has become increasingly important for.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell me about the idea of simulating a mass malware outbreak. This is something that you've done at your organization?
Yes.
Okay, tell us about that.
I'm a very, very big proponent of testing security in general. I believe that security should be constantly evaluated, should be constantly tested to see what actually works and what doesn't work in your environment. It's also a great way to identify ways of improving things within your environment. So about 2015 or so, I began doing tests like that within my own environment, and I kind of saw the writing on the wall for mass malware outbreaks starting to hit hospitals. So one of the things I was really interested in doing is evaluating how well my hospital could withstand an attack against it in terms of a mass malware outbreak. So one of the things I did is I wrote a Perl script that took the ICAR test string, which for those unfamiliar with it, it's a harmless string of characters, but years and years ago, all the AV makers got together and agreed to treat this harmless string of characters as a virus.
Interesting.
So it provides a safe but effective way of testing what a malware outbreak would be like for your organization. So I wrote a script that took this ICAR test string and attempted to copy and execute it on every PC within my environment. And it was a very, very interesting exercise to see how the malware could spread through the environment, what controls were effective, what controls weren't effective. It's also a great way to evaluate staff responses, because we didn't really tell most of the staff that this was happening. So most of IT, most of the people within the organization were unaware of what was happening. So it would give a real feedback for how the organization would respond to this attack. And the results were very, very interesting. I mean, I was proud to see that my staff were able to discover the source of the infection, the PC running the script, and pull it off the network. But we did identify ways in which response times could be improved. And we also clearly developed an idea of what controls were effective and what controls were not effective. In particular, we had network segmentation at the time, mostly by department. And that was very effective at keeping the threat contained. But as an organization, we still decided that even losing a whole department, especially if it's a clinical one, might be unacceptable to the organization. So that got us to think about ways of taking network segmentation to the next level.
And when it comes to network segmentation, I mean, is the next level of that, is that zero trust, or am I kind of making too big of a leap, because I know you're an advocate of zero trust?
Yes, we went towards a more zero trust model. And I define zero trust in the more traditional network sense, where my definition of zero trust is any device can only communicate with another device that explicitly needs to. If the communication is not explicitly needed, it's blocked by default. So we spent quite a bit of time deploying a zero trust environment within our organization. We started in the data center. We used a VMware NSX for that, which basically puts a virtual firewall in front of each virtual machine, lets you control communications to and from each virtual machine in your environment. Then we kind of spread out to the endpoints in the organization. For that, we largely used a NAC appliance from Extreme Networks, and basically we used that to apply policies based on device type. The NAC appliance was nice because you can protect two devices even plugged into the same switch from each other, and it works really well for anything where there's a large number of the same device.
And didn't you say, I mean, within your organization, one PC can't really talk to or ping another PC because there's no need for that. There's other ways to communicate securely, right?
I mean, if you think about it, in most organizations, people need to communicate with the servers in their environment, things like that, to access data. There's very few use cases where one worker's PC needs to talk directly to the other worker's PC. So we did use those policies to restrict that kind of access. So basically our two solutions work together. The NAC appliance applies policies to ensure the PCs can only communicate with our server subnets and nothing else. And those server subnets are micro-segmented with NSX to ensure that only the PCs that need to communicate with that particular server can communicate with it. So the two solutions kind of work together to form that zero trust architecture.
And so when you look back over this zero trust journey, I mean, how long did it take you to get this into place, to implement it? Because it is a journey, right?
Yes, it's a time-consuming process. It's not something you can do overnight, particularly in healthcare, because downtime is, as mentioned earlier, it's something you really have to avoid in healthcare. So you don't want to mess it up. You want to take your time and deploy
Right.
it. How we approached it was we chose to do the data center first, but you can make an equal argument for starting with the endpoints. And within the data center, we began by doing our well-known servers and services first, things like DNX, DHCP. They're going to be well-known to the network team. The chance of breaking stuff is minimal because they're well understood. And it also gets people the ability to learn the new products that you're putting in place. So we started with the stuff like that first. We moved on to our VDI desktops, largely because VDI desktops for most organizations, they're clones of each other. So you establish one set of policies that works, and then you can protect a large swath of machines in one go. We then kind of moved on to our higher risk systems in the data center that were a little more complex to do, and we saved the low risk but very complex systems for last, and that's kind of the approach we took.
Okay, great. And as you look back over that now, I mean, do you feel pretty confident that you're more secure than you were? Obviously, we know there's no such thing as a panacea, right? Zero trust is not a panacea. I heard you say that during your session. But do you feel like it has improved your security, risk kind of outlook?
It's definitely improved security. As you mentioned, nothing can be perfect, but we do continual testing, and it has helped with some of those tests. I can also mention a real-world incident that we faced, which was actually a very interesting way to have your perimeter breached, is we had an X-ray machine go down, and the hard drive in the X-ray machine crashed. And the company that services the machine couldn't locate the original disk to restore the software on its own. But they did service another hospital who had the same machine.
Oh, man.
And the interesting thing is they cloned that hospital's machine to restore ours to service. And that hospital's image of the hard drive came pre-infected with the virus.
Oh, no.
I mean, we picked it up within a couple of minutes because we used a DNS sinkhole and other stuff, and the network segmentation kept it completely contained, so it became a non-issue. But but there have been some real-world incidents like that where the zero trust has worked to protect us from a threat moving through the organization.
That is incredible. That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and just kind of your journey and different real-world use cases that have popped up. So that's fantastic. And the last question I have for you, which is something that I like to ask everybody on the podcast, is, I'm sure you have a bunch of things that you need to be doing right now at your organization, but here you are at SecureWorld New York. You were presenting, and I'm sure you'll be networking and collaborating. Why do you feel that it matters to do this?
It's always good to be exposed to new ideas because no one person can think of everything, and it's always very interesting to share ideas because you're always going to pick up something that might be useful to you.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, we know that you've shared some of those useful things right now, so thank you, Christopher, very much. We appreciate you being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we've spent quite a bit of time today talking about zero trust, and often there is confusion about what it is and what it is not. And that's part of today's Trend Micro Top 3. Number 1, says Trend Micro, zero trust is not a market or a product. Buying a product with a lot of zero trust labeling won't actually fix your security on its own. Zero trust is more of a model or a guiding design principle. Number 2, weaving zero trust into your security strategy can increase your security posture. All security architectures need to consider things like, is the network too flat? How are unmanaged endpoints dealt with? And regulating separation, segmentation, and isolation. And number 3, Trend Micro has a number of products that can help you implement the zero trust model. But again, the company emphasizes that zero trust is not an individual product. Now, I'm going to place a link in the show notes to a recent blog post on zero trust so you can read more from the Trend Micro team. And thanks to Trend Micro for being our premier podcast partner. And as long as we're on the zero trust train, I want to share an insightful quote from a recent SecureWorld web conference on zero trust. Bruce Lowry, security architect at Symetra, kicked off the web conference by defining what he thinks zero trust actually means. Here are his words. Zero trust is a security concept centered on the belief that organizations should not automatically trust anything inside or outside its perimeters, and instead must verify anything and everything trying to connect to its systems before granting access. And after you start with zero trust, You can then focus on building trust and defining what you must establish to have that trust. Here are a few of the examples Lobry shared in the web conference. For example, he says, an important question to ask: do I trust the machine you are working on is secure? How do I verify the machine you're working on has not been compromised, or do I even need to? If you're on a corporate network, do you scan the machine for compliance with corporate policy? How do I verify the application you are using to connect to our service is current? What if it's not? Do I just warn you that it's not? Do I refuse to connect if it is not? Do I put you into a sandbox until I validate everything? These are great questions, right? These are considerations around zero trust. And there's much more in the Secure World Web Conference. I will put a link to it in the show notes because it's available on demand. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I don't think I have, actually, but I am a huge fan of our web conferences, which happen on a regular basis and are complimentary. Our digital team does a fantastic job finding leaders on certain topics to share what they are up to and what's working. And each one of these web conferences is attended by hundreds of your peers. And no, I'm not exaggerating. They're highly attended. And I know that means they're bringing value. So check it out. What's coming next with our web conferences? You can go to our website, secureworldexpo.com, and click on resources. That's secureworldexpo.com and click on resources. Speaking of that, we want to be a resource for you. If you've got ideas for topics we should tackle here on the Secure World Sessions podcast, our address is media@secureworldexpo.com. That's media@secureworldexpo.com. Okay, let's talk about next time now. We are going to look at nation-state actors and the cyber threats they pose to us in this new decade. Destroying things with cyber attacks, cyber-related campaigns could be their greatest weapon against Western nations, including the U.S., Canada, and the EU. That is next time. Well, thanks so much for listening, and thank you for rating the Secure World Sessions or sharing it if you have a moment, because together we're all a part of Secure World's mission of connecting, informing, and developing leaders in cybersecurity. On behalf of the Secure World team, I'm Bruce Sussman, your host of the Secure World Sessions, and let's catch up again next time.